I'm going to go ahead and call this October 21, 2019 meeting of the Whitefish City Council. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. Jerry, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight? Thank you, Jerry. We'll move on to item 3 of our agenda, which is our communications from the public. We do have 2 public hearings advertised for this evening, which we'll hold under agenda item number 6. But if you have anything at this time to share with the council, now would be your opportunity. Your name and address for the record, please, Rebecca.
Good evening, council and mayor, staff. My name is Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue. I'm running for city council, and I just wanted to let people know that there's going to be 2 community forums, candidate forums that have been organized. One is at the Whitefish Library this Wednesday, October 23rd from 7 to 9 p.m. Frank, you're coming, right? And Wednesday, well, and then Monday, October 28th, here, City Hall, from 7 to 9, and Mayor Mulfold will be at that one. Right, John?
I think so.
Okay. So anyways.
I may be out of town working, which I did inform you of, but I'll do my best to make it.
Okay. Yeah. So anyways, we normally have it done by a third party, but this year the chamber is doing a meet and greet at the Village Shop on Thursday the 24th. So if there are any business owners in the community that want to go and meet up with the candidates, that will be from 5 to 7. So, and then the election is November 5th. And there's 5 people running for 3 seats, and our mayor is uncontested. So that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Community Unity Consulting, P.O. Box 35, Kalispell. I'm here tonight because I want to make sure that some information that I provided earlier to the Highway Corridor Committee got to the council. And by way of getting it to the council, it's a way of getting it out to the community as well, to really encourage awareness of the really critical work that's being done to look at the Highway Corridor Plan. We have a very dedicated committee that you've appointed, as well as some counselors that are working on that committee. But I think the outreach to the community and their awareness of the critical decisions that are being made and how those are being made is really important to share. And so the handout that I'm going to give you tonight outlines some suggestions that I think will help improve public awareness of what is happening in that process. I'm encouraging you to do things from posting draft minutes so that those committee meetings are right now just once a month or once every few months. And so it allows the public to stay up to speed prior to the meeting rather than having to wait to come to a meeting, minutes get approved, and then you get a delay of over a month of finding out what happened at the last meeting. So little things like that. The other key suggestion that I am recommending is that the committee and you support that there be fact sheets developed on key issues. Things like information that we just heard on the update of the sewer and water, to really understand the capacity that the city has to expand service or not expand service, to understand the status of housing and what housing needs could be met in that quarter, have been met in that quarter. Having that kind of factual information, transportation capacity. There have been some presentations on those items, but to really have an informed public to participate in that process, I think we need some more fact sheets and findings that are guiding and informing the committee, and that can in turn guide and inform the public when there are opportunities for more public input. I understand there'll probably be another large charrette like you've had almost a year ago, asking for public input. So this is a way to do it in little pieces. And I guess I would also like you to look at your legal requirements for accepting public comment. Your former city manager has informed me that when I've emailed him information I'd like to be presented under this point on your agenda, which is information, public comment on items not on the agenda, which you're legally required to hold. I've been told a number of times that he would not submit that information to you. So I'm here tonight to physically hand it to you because I got the same confusion from staff today as to whether or not it would be given to you. But I think you're legally obligated to take it, and I hope that you will recognize that it's not to overwhelm you, but to simply inform the public, and also to, rather than, as I was told, it would just all be given to you at the end when all of the information from the committee comes forward. That's a lot to wade through, and so I think having it at this point hopefully is helpful to you. And just on another note, I have not seen any indication of what the city's plan are on hiring a new city manager. I haven't seen anything in the paper or in watching your meetings. So it would be nice, I think, for us in the public to get an update on what your plans are in that regard. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I normally don't respond to public comment, but I'm just going to take a brief opportunity to do so. When we voted on promoting Dana to interim city manager, I laid out our plan of action for permanently filling the city manager position at the end of the meeting this evening. I plan to give an update on that as well. So if those of you would like to be more informed as to our schedule and that sort of thing, please stick around to the end of the meeting. Is there any further public comment tonight? Sir.
Evening. My name is Chuck Bergesmith, Box 5322 in Whitefish. I'm here to answer any questions or concerns on item number 7. Represent Mark and Shelley Elliott about a lakeshore variance for reconstruction. I can answer questions now, or I'm more than happy to wait to the end after everything gets...
Yeah, why don't we, we'll get to that item pretty quickly, believe me or not.
No problem.
And if we have questions of you, we'll certainly call you back up.
Okay.
So thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor, council members. My name is Scott Davis. I own the Montana Trolley Company here in Flathead County. And today I read an article in the newspaper that you folks were possibly considering some type of shuttle service throughout your city. And I'm just here to hand out some information that I'd like all the council members and everybody to look at, because we're very interested in helping you out with this problem.
Great, thanks, Scott. We'll take that up here, sure. Melissa? Thank you. Further public comment tonight? Richard Hildner. Name and address for the record, please.
Richard Hildner, 104 5th Street, Whitefish, Montana, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not as a councilor member, so the record should indicate. But I do believe we have a public relations issue or problem, perhaps, with our solid waste hauler, Republic Services. On October 3rd, I received an email notice from Republic stating that they couldn't process my automatic payment in the amount of 30 cents because it wasn't within range of $1 to $15,000. They said I had to pay the 30 cents or avoid late fees in order to avoid late fees. So last week I went out to their office with 30 cents in my pocket, and I was told that the fee was the city's fault, and the ensuing request for late payment fees would be then the city's responsibility to somehow collect. And so I said I'd like to pay off the 30 cents. They said they didn't take cash. I asked about the late fees, and they said, oh, just ignore it. They just would put it on next quarter's bill. Well, several things with that just didn't ring true, and I think that I'm not the only person in the city who may have received a similar notice from Republic. Keep in mind that Republic is a very large, multi-state business with 2,800 communities and municipalities in their portfolio. First, they blamed the city. They made a threat they had no intention to follow up on, and to mail the 30 cents, because they don't take cash, would cost another 55 cents just for the stamp. Republic suggested I pay online. Not all of our citizens are able to pay online or make up a 30-cent shortfall online. It's my hope that Council will be actively engaged when the next refuse contract between Republic or another provider is negotiated. And I hope you'll look into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate the comments. Further public comment tonight from the audience? Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Any volunteer board reports? Not seeing any. We'll move on to our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the October 7, 2019 meeting minutes, or can I have a motion for approval, please? Thanks. Yes, please.
Those corrections now, Mr. Mayor. On page 42, last paragraph, or excuse me, second paragraph, last word, cites S-I-G-H-T-S to S-I-T-E-S, please. And in the next paragraph, just add where it says Legacy Partners reported that Lion Mountain, add the words trailhead, had over 45,000 visitors in the past year.
Thank you.
That's
Now,
it.
a motion for approval, please,
And
as
following-
corrected.
As corrected.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Hartman. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, Michelle, which brings us on to our two public hearings tonight. We'll start with item 6A, which will be ordinance 19-20, rezoning approximately 1.459 acres of land located at 1320 Wisconsin Avenue in Section 24, Township 31 North, Range 22 West, in Flathead County, Montana, from WR1, which is the county's one-family residential district, to WR2, which is our two-family residential district, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone. Hillary.
Thank you. Good evening, all. So, as the mayor said, this is about an acre-and-a-half parcel with 2 lots located at 1320 Wisconsin Avenue. The rezoning request from WR1 to WR2 would allow the applicant to add a duplex on one of the 2 lots on the parcel. About half an acre of the parcel is categorized as cropland. That's the apple orchard that you see as you're driving along Wisconsin. And the applicant's single-family home is located on the other acre. The owners have sufficient land to subdivide into several smaller lots, but they are needing to maintain single ownership, and they don't want to subdivide anymore because of the tax benefit of having the orchard as part of their property. The future land use designation for the parcel is urban, and the appropriate zoning for urban land is 1-family limited, 1-family, and 2-family residential. The property to the south is also zoned WR1 and is used for a single-family residence right now. It also has a future land use designation of urban. The property to the north is zoned WR3, which is the low-density multifamily residential, and that's the location of about, I think it's 20 condominiums as part of the Wildwood development, and the land use designation is high-density residential. The request was reviewed in accordance with the zoning regulations and the state criteria for zoning. Some of the more pertinent findings are that the proposed zone change is consistent with the growth policy and the future land use designation of urban. It would also promote compatible urban growth because the parcel is served by all public services, and the zoning is consistent with the growth policy. The proposed zone change considers the character of the district and its suitability for particular uses because it would provide a good transition between the single-family neighborhood to the south and the higher density residential area to the north with the condos. And it will also encourage appropriate use of land throughout the jurisdictional area. Staff recommended approval of the zoning map amendment at the September 19th Planning Board meeting, and Planning Board recommended approval with a 4-2 vote. And I just wanted to acknowledge that the 2 votes that were against the approval indicated that it was because they did not want to set a precedent for other areas that are zoned WR1 to be able to apply to be WR2. And I just wanted to point out that the difference between this subject property and the property directly to the south is that we have this high-density residential use directly to the north already. It's zoned, and there's 20 condos there. And then we have the Whitefish Lodge directly to the north of that. And so this would provide a really good opportunity to have transitional zoning between the WR1 and the WR3. And we see this throughout town, that there are a lot of gradations in zoning. As far as whether the property to the south could then come in and request a rezone, I don't think the same argument could be made. There wouldn't be a need for a transition at that point, because there already would be one. So I think because of this transitional zoning and the gradient that it would provide, that it's still appropriate, and staff does recommend approval. So if you have any further questions, I know that the applicant is here as well, and is happy to talk about why we went with this approach rather than maybe another way.
Thanks, Hillary. Frank, question?
Hillary, which of the 2 lots is actually being asked, or really is requiring the change in zoning? We've got 2 lots there, as at least the way it appears. 1 ownership, but 2 lots.
Yeah, so there is, the single-family home is on the southern of the 2 lots,
Okay,
and the duplex would go on the northern of the 2.
so 2CC would be where the 2 lots.
Yeah.
Was there any consideration for simply changing the zoning on the 1 lot as opposed to both lots?
Well, I think the applicant and what we've talked about is keeping things as much the same across the whole property as possible, just because we don't want to have a change in how the property is assessed for tax purposes. It may be that just rezoning one of the lots would be sufficient, but I don't know how the state is going to assess that then, if it would be any different. But that may work.
Further questions for Hillary on her staff report? Andy?
Just a quick question, Hillary. say we don't have a half acre of apples and we have something other than a duplex and a house on there. What's the maximum number of units that could be built on that acre and a half with WR2 as opposed to WR1?
So WR1 on those two lots together, you could put up to about 6 houses. Depends on how the roads are laid out and parking and all those other requirements, topography. With the WR2, you could potentially have 10 houses or 9 duplexes. So that would be 18 units.
Additional questions for Hillary? Thanks very much. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 19-21. I would invite the applicant or the applicant's representative, if there's anything additional you'd like to bring to the attention of the council. You must be Dewey. Your name and address for the record, please. Thanks.
Dewey Hartman in 1320 Wisconsin. Just a little bit of personal stuff first. Months ago, our two kids, Pam and Greg, called and wanted to have a family conference with us. And we've done this a lot of years. They've been gone 45 years probably. They had a plan, which is sort of scary, and they wanted to drop us on it. And when we all got together in our living room, they started talking about their days back in Whitefish, how they swam in the lake and skied on the mountain and had good friends and enjoyed their education, loved their teachers, and it was so good that after 40-some years, they wanted to come back, which really thrilled us. Their plan, and that's what we're talking about now, is to build a duplex on that northern chunk, the CC chunk, up next to the Wildwood condominiums that are just to our north. Their plan is, first of all, they'll retire. They'll sell what they have where they're living right now. One is actually renting. And then with that duplex built on that north lot, just simply move in and become citizens of Whitefish. They're excited as much as we are. Those units that we're talking about, those 2 units their planning would be about, first of all, they're not going to be a rental. Our kids are going to come here and be citizens here. They'll move here and stay here. They won't have any place elsewhere to live, so there won't be any commuting back and forth. They're expecting to have units of about 900. They're pretty frugal, I guess. They got that from us. 900 each unit, 2 bedrooms, so they can have grandkids come in. Our 2 kids are alone. Well, they have grandkids. And so they'd like to have 2 bedrooms. Their thinking is to have a duplex so that again, frugalness, to have that third wall in there, that'll only leave, or that middle wall there, so leaving only 3 rooms to be 3 walls exposed to the elements. Plus, in their frugalness again, they would have all the plumbing on the inner wall, the kitchen, the bathrooms, the utility rooms, so that the construction and the plumbing part of it would be as economical as possible. So that's the plan. Now, how it would work out between the retirement and the construction and they're selling the units, that's up to them. I'm just trying to be sort of a go-between right now in getting this done. When they return to Whitefish, they will be good citizens of Whitefish. They're already established in Whitefish simply by history. They're, on my side, the 3rd generation Whitefish. And on Sandra's side, 4th generation Whitefish. They still have friends in town from their class and teachers too that they talk about. Greg has talked a little bit about maybe teaching a class in the community college. They're both sort of physical fitness nuts, and they'll ride bikes and they'll utilize the trails and the pedestrian paths that we have in town. They think the library is a good place too to go. You have any questions?
Thanks, Dewey. Any questions for the applicant at this time? Frank?
Is there some reason that, given where they want to build and where they're going to put, that we shouldn't just be dealing with a zone change with respect to the one lot as opposed to the entire parcel that you guys own?
I really don't understand this stuff too much.
Right.
But we do have an orchard there.
Right.
And to split that up, I'm not sure of the tax consequences that might derive from that. And that would, I mean, I don't know what the state would do.
But you've got, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to argue with you, and I appreciate your request, and I think it's for the most part reasonable. I think the concern we have is, or that I have, is that is a change of zone on the entire parcel could increase the densities in that area way beyond what you would ever consider or would have considered for yourselves, should at some point that property change hands. Narrowing the change in zone for the one parcel as opposed to both, they still could be jointly or community owned or owned by you, and so that doesn't change the overall ownership. It just changes the zoning for that one piece. I'm not going to opine on what that'll do for your taxes or how that'll affect your ag exemption or anything else, but I'm just trying to get a handle on is there a plan here, or is there some reason that we shouldn't be just considering this for the one lot that it would be necessary for?
That I can't answer. I don't have a plan for that.
Okay.
I don't know how to answer it.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Further questions for the applicant? Thanks, Dewey. If anything else arises, we'll call you back up. Thanks. Public testimony this evening on this item. Any public testimony on what will be ordinance 19-21? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Richard.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 19-21, rezoning approximately 1.459 acres of land at 1320 Wisconsin Avenue.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion on the motion. Richard.
Yeah, I understand the concern about increasing the potential for increased density if we went from just the duplex to, what'd you say, 18 units maximum on that 1.4 acres at some future time. I think that's the major concern of many, is what might happen 40 years from now. But I don't have that crystal ball. But I do know that it makes logical sense to me to allow that stepping of zoning that Hillary mentioned, that we go from WR4 to WR3 to WR2 to WR1. I look forward to hopefully seeing your children at City Council.
Thank you, Richard. Further discussion on the motion? I had one question. I think I know the answer to this, but certainly short-term rentals are not allowed in this zoning district, correct? Thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks for coming tonight, Dewey. Best of luck to your children. And we'll move on to item 6B, which will be resolution 19-33, a resolution adopting the City of Whitefish Parking Management Plan. And we'll stay with Hillary.
I don't actually need this for my presentation, but Julie will need it when she comes up, so we might have to do that again. Okay, so in September, Julie Dixon and her team from Dixon Resources presented a draft parking management plan to you at a work session. And the plan is based on what Dixon and city staff heard through a series of public engagement and an interview process over this summer in conjunction with Dixon's specialized knowledge about parking management. The key findings and recommendations of the September draft have not really substantially changed since then, but Julie will summarize those points when she gives her presentation. There were some minor revisions that were made to the draft plan following the work session based on written comments from Councilors Hildner and Williams. The comments and how they are addressed in the final draft of the plan are provided in the table that was attached to your transmittal letter. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more about one of Councilor Williams' comments, which is a valid concern. There is a recommendation to increase the hours of parking restrictions beyond 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Monday through Friday. And the purpose of that recommendation is to make sure that employees who are coming in for their evening shift, say they come in at 4 o'clock, they know that they've got, basically they can park wherever they want, right in front of their place of business that they're working, and they can stay there the rest of the night. And the problem with that is that the customers who are coming into those restaurants and bars and whatnot are not having those places available to them to park. So that's the intention of this recommendation. But I think it's really important that we all understand that this can't happen just on its own. It has to come in concert with several other implementation items that are listed or described in the plan. We need to have an alternative location for those employees to park if they're not going to be parking in front of where they're working. And we have to have some better enforcement. And we need to have a way to let people who are customers stay in that place longer than 2 hours. And so I think the plan is addressing all of these things, and the challenging part is to get the timing right and to do a lot of things all at one time. One of the key recommendations is that the city identify one point person basically for the city that can kind of oversee implementation of the plan and help coordinate all of the different actions that are going to be going on in different departments, because there are a lot of different city departments that are involved in parking. And city staff have been meeting and talking about this idea, and as of right now, we think that it would be a good idea for the administrative services director / the city clerk. This would be a great task for her to oversee, because she's already working across departments. And so that's one idea that we've thought about as a first step in implementing the plan. Some of the recommended implementation actions can be completed in-house with existing resources, although like I mentioned before, a lot of them need to be happening at the same time. And so we might want to consider, or City Council might want to consider an additional contract with Dixon that could help us develop some of these implementation items and plans or implementation programs simultaneously and help get them done a lot more efficiently than if we were trying to do it all in-house. Some of the things that they could help with are writing specs and vendor agreements for obtaining parking technology software that's going to coordinate with what we already have and be a good transition. They can help with developing an all-day employee permit parking plan or program. There are a number of things that they could help us do more efficiently than if we were going to try and do them by ourselves. So Julie Dixon is here from Dixon Resources. She'll be able to answer some more detailed questions and to explain some of the nuances. But staff does recommend council approval of the draft plan with the understanding that not every single one of the implementation items is what's being approved right now. We're approving kind of the roadmap forward. This is kind of the intention of the plan. And then all of these different pieces are probably going to come back to you for further feedback and approval. So that's all I have. If you have questions for me, I can try and answer them now, or Julie can also answer some of your questions.
Thanks, Hillary. Any questions for Hillary before we hear from Julie? Thanks, Hillary. Okay. And welcome, Julie.
Thank you for having me back. And I will just get the first slide there. I'll just go. Thank you very much, Hillary. Perfect. So thank you again, and we'll be brief because you also have spent so much time with the work session as well. I just want to also just really commend the community and how active the stakeholders have been. And in fact, the engagement has continued even with all of your feedback as well. It's been really just a real benefit to the plan because we really tried to engage as much of the community as possible. And the one message that doesn't change, the one thing that's important about parking is that it needs to be easy, convenient, and safe and accessible. And so I think when we talk about the recommendations and the guidelines that were laid out in front of you, I always say to folks, if we can follow those 3 core objectives in really everything that we do, whether it be about a parking permit program, whether it be about time limits or just parking management in general, it really does help us really stay focused and really think about the customer experience, which I think is something that we talked about before. Oftentimes when we talk about parking, it's usually a negative. There's a connotation, parking tickets, and all these things that really get people's hackles up. But we really want to start to change the message and talk about the walkability of downtown and the reason why parking at some of our perimeter locations, or why the fact that you do have this gem of a parking garage and the fact that it's so easy and convenient to get to the garage and then get around town. Again, I know depending on time of the year, we've obviously been able to spend some quality time here over the summertime, and I've gotten to witness some of your most impacted times. And I think that those are things too that I always like to highlight, and I think as outlined in the plan, is that you really have to manage for the average day. You can't manage for exception. The fact is that you need to have exceptional policies that'll deal with 4th of July or farmers market days or things like that. But in general, we want to make sure that this is a solution that'll be viable for the different peak seasons of the year. And I think that that's also something that's very important, is that when we talk about parking management in Whitefish, this is something that can be seasonal. And so even when Hillary mentioned the opportunity to potentially extend hours or expand days of the week, these are things too that can be seasonally based. I've got to say that word. Can be based on the season. And I think that that's something that's really important when we talk about managing parking. We did hear quite a bit of feedback that we need to build another parking garage, but for a community like yours, that's obviously a significant expense. I did like to highlight throughout the outreach the fact that the price tag that you did pay for your parking garage was amazing, and it was very much a deal. I have to really emphasize that because the cost of building a garage today, I don't think you'd find quite the affordable nature of that. But before we get to a place of considering building another parking asset, it's really about consistently managing the assets that we have today and being able to identify things like the long-term parking for employees and having maybe a few more conveniently located places for them to park, as well as our customers and our tourists and our residents and our visitors who want to come downtown. We want to make sure that that parking is available to them. Hillary already touched on the fact that the reason why extending the hours or expanding the hours is important, but what's also very important behind that is the consistency of the compliance, is that we need to make sure folks understand that we have policies and rules for a reason. Otherwise, you'll find folks tending to make shortcuts and tending to abuse the program if we don't necessarily enforce or manage the rules that we post out there. We also think it's really imperative to, again, continue to support transit, the opportunity to increase awareness or frequencies or routes when it comes to transit. We're really excited about the stop over by the library with the circulation route there. That could potentially also play a part when it talks about the rideshare companies and things like that as well, but also a great location where the hotel shuttles can also make drop-offs as well. And what I mentioned here a moment ago is one of the first phases that we think is going to be really critical for Whitefish is that parking permit program and being able to expand it throughout the downtown area. And in terms of those next steps, I really like to highlight this, and I know it's the last bullet on there, but I'll say it first, is that regardless of which approach Whitefish takes, that outreach component is really critical, and making sure that we keep people aware. The one thing that's important about parking is transparency. We want people to know what the policies are. We want them to know what the rules are because we want them to follow the rules. And so we want to make sure to be as open and dynamic with this process. And some of the things that can come along with this are the different technologies that could potentially help make us more efficient in managing our parking, as well as the need to be able to acquire a vehicle to help manage the parking infrastructure. And I thought, just for everybody's benefit, when we talked about outreach, I mentioned to Hillary that I was going to share throughout the process. We've been talking about the city of Paso Robles, California. It's in Central California. It's a tourist destination. It's the wine country there in Central California. But this was just an example of, they launched a parking program in August. And I have to tell you that the #1 piece of this outreach program has been about information, community awareness. And I gotta tell you, no matter where you go, people are talking about parking. But here's the thing that's been amazing is the program launched in August, and we daily are receiving emails and correspondences from community members and business owners telling the city how much they appreciate the changes and what a positive change it's basically had in the downtown. And what's happened is we've basically taken the employees and removed them from the core of downtown, and they're actually participating in the remote or like perimeter parking locations. And you can see just by some of the signage and the outreach that's been out there, it's really been about this positive brand and positive message when we talk about the customer experience. And I just really wanted to share the opportunity that happened in Paso, and it's something that we think can be replicated in other communities just like yours. And so with that, that is our presentation for the evening.
Thanks very much, Julie. Any questions for Julie? Frank?
Julie, I've got some familiarity with Paso Robles because I've spent some time there, both in the spring and the fall sometime. When did you say they implemented this plan?
August 14th is when the paid parking initiative went live.
Of this year?
Of this year.
Okay, because I was there in the spring for several weeks, and everybody was talking about parking, and they were all talking about how they could manage it. And I was amazed at the time at how familiar their concerns were and how consistent they were with what exactly the problem that we have. So thank you.
No problem.
Further questions? Further questions for Julie? Not seeing any. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll call you back up if anything arises. Is there any public comment this evening on this item? Scott, you were signed up. Did you have any public comment related to this plan? You don't have to comment. I just saw your name on the list. That's all. We just like to be involved. Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion or discussion.
Sure.
Richard.
Sure. Let me get my cheat sheet here. I would go ahead and move to approve Resolution 1933, a resolution adopting the City of Whitefish Parking Management Plan.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennon. Further discussion? Richard.
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate going back through and seeing how you dealt with at least some of my comments, and I want to reiterate that I think one of the key issues is to get people out of their cars and on their feet or on their bikes, and anything we can do to make that happen is a positive. I worry because we have a long history in Whitefish of parking plans that gather dust, and that this has the same potential to be a dust collector. And so I would admonish not only this council but future councils to follow the implementation recommendations and budget appropriately, because if we don't, that's exactly what we'll have, is another 3-ring binder sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Well stated, Richard. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Michelle, thanks for traveling up here, Julie, and for all your hard work. Appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and move on to item 7A of our agenda, which is communications from our Planning and Building Director. And this is item 7A, a consideration of a request from Mark and Sally Elliott for a Whitefish Lakeshore variance to reconstruct an existing dwelling unit within the Lake and Lakeshore Protection Zone, and the property is located at 1110 Birch Point Drive. Bailey.
Okay, good evening. So the applicant is requesting a minor variance to reconstruct an existing dwelling unit that's within the Lake and Lakeshore Protection Zone. They're proposing to vertically expand the structure but not increase the actual footprint of the building. And then they're also requesting a minor variance to the non-conforming structures section of the regulations because the Lakeshore regulations allow remodeling and maintenance of buildings, but any addition, enlargements, or the complete reconstruction requires a variance to that, to a couple sections. The existing dwelling unit was built in 1969, according to the state of Montana CAMA property records, and this was prior to the adoption of the Lake and Lakeshore Protection Regulations, which happened in the mid-70s. It's considered a non-conforming structure, and as I said, it's permitted to be maintained and repaired, but only to the extent of its current footprint and the current building height. They are proposing to reconstruct the oldest portion of the structure, and where the building is currently an A-frame type structure, they're proposing to make it a more traditional square type structure with a new roof shape. The shape will expand the structure vertically, as I said, and so a variance is required as well to rebuild the entire footprint. Since the structure is also located within the zoning setbacks and the water quality protection regulation setbacks, a zoning variance must also be granted by the Board of Adjustment prior to any building permit being approved. However, they cannot apply for that process without first obtaining the Lakeshore variance. So it's a multi-step process, and this is step one of that process. Since the proposal will reconstruct the house in the same footprint, the square footage for the impervious surface calculation will actually not change. There was only one other file that was on record for the property, and that was from 2005, and there was a minor variance to the constructed area allowance for the installation of a dock on the subject property. And at that application and staff report at that time in 2005 does state that the existing structure, the deck, the riprap retaining wall, everything was in place prior to the Lakeshore regulations going into effect. So reviewing a minor variance request, there's 4 criteria that must be met in order to grant approval or consider granting approval. So as I said, the existing dwelling unit was constructed prior to the Lakeshore regulations. However, it was in 1969. However, the lot actually wasn't created in its current form until 1975. So I wasn't able to go back to see how the property looked prior to what it currently looks like now. But according to the approved plat, the lot is only 66 feet deep. The lot is also unique because Birch Point Drive, which is a publicly maintained street and open to the public for access, is actually not located in a dedicated right-of-way at this location, or an easement. It's not in an easement or dedicated right-of-way that we can find. And it's been like this for years. Due to the location of Birch Point Drive and the current zoning setbacks, on the road side, the property is reduced 20 feet for their setback. And then with the 20-foot Lakeshore Protection Zone, the additional 10-foot Water Quality Protection Zone, on the water side of the lot, this leaves only a 16-foot wide strip of potentially buildable area. And I say potentially because you also have to throw in the side setbacks for the zoning as well. So basically what I described is going this way, but you also have to go this way as well. So due to the unusual circumstances with the size of the lot, location of the existing structure, the current zoning regulations, the water quality regulations, the location of Birch Point Drive, not in an easement or right-of-way, strict enforcement of the regulations would result in a hardship, as they would not be able to reconstruct the structure on the property without any variance of any kind. Let's see. Under no reasonable alternatives exist. Just to note that setback that was identified by the water quality regulations was actually not adopted until 2007. And As I said, there's no reasonable alternatives that would exist to comply with the regulations. Additionally, the age of the structure and its proximity to the water have left the building structurally unsuitable for just a simple interior remodel. They really have to get in there and fix it at this point. The request would not materially diminish water quality, fish or wildlife habitat, create a public nuisance. The existing foundation and the building are cracking and decomposing due to the proximity of the structure to the water. They're not altering the characteristics of the shoreline with the retaining wall and deck won't be affected. They're not touching that part. And then there are regulations that do specify a maximum building height for the portion of the building within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. Normally, our zoning allows a structure to go up to 35 feet, just under our general zoning. The Lakeshore regulations cap that at 25 feet for any structure that's within the Lakeshore protection area. And then, get to my first page, sorry. So staff is recommending approval of the request subject to 10 conditions. The Whitefish Lakeshore Protection Committee met on October 9th and considered the request. And the draft minutes are attached as part of your packet this evening. The Lakeshore Protection Committee did vote to recommend approval of the application on a 4-to-1 vote. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. And then the applicant is here as well, as he stated earlier. So.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on her staff report? I had one, Bailey, and I think you mentioned this, but it slipped my mind. The height of the proposed structure within the Lakeshore Protection Zone will be
25 feet is the maximum. And I think they're actually, on the plans, I think they had it at 24 feet,
Okay.
just because of a different roof pitch is really what they're doing.
Okay. It appears to me, I know this project was built well in advance of the Lakeshore regulations being adopted. It appears this entire structure is basically, and probably portions are outside, entirely within the Lakeshore Protection Zone.
Yeah.
Below the ordinary high water mark.
So the
And landward at least 20 feet, if not in addition to the 10 feet, which is the water quality setback. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the lakeshore, the high water is basically right on the edge of the house, and Chuck can explain it more as well, but basically the retaining wall is basically right along the house. The deck is actually in the lake. Yeah, that's actually a better picture. Thanks, Michelle.
So does that deck go away?
No, the deck's not being touched. It's not part of this project. It's saying they're not doing anything to the deck at all. It's staying there. It's mainly the house back is what they're touching, is what they're going to deal with. And so you're right. I mean, it's basically the portion that is the second story. That's the portion that was built in 2005, I believe is the building permit that I have. And that part is outside of the 20 feet and the 10 foot. So it's basically kind of about what the picture is showing. It's that pretty much that single story area is what they're touching, or what's affected.
Okay, so visually, I think in your staff report, under the considerations for a minor variance, I think you made the argument that, reconstruction of this structure will address blight or what have you. I forget how you exactly.
Yeah, well, it's
yet the deck remains.
Yeah, the deck, they're not touching the deck at all. So, I mean, it was more of the foundation is cracking under, under the main part of the house is what they're fixing. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Richard.
So, is the deck considered to be, even though they're not going to touch it, according to this, is that part of the structure?
Technically, I think according to building code, if it's attached, it's part of the structure, I would assume. Because if you have a covered deck or something, it's affixed to the building. So under building code, it's probably considered part of it.
Okay, so at some future date, then someone could say this is part of the structure and I want to reconstruct it.
They would have to come in for a new
Right.
variance application to do that.
And claim the hardship and all of that.
They would have to make that case at the
Okay.
time.
From the previous picture, how do all of the other buildings, houses, homes, how did they get enough setback?
So I think And I haven't looked at when they were built. I do know there was a project, I can't remember, I feel like it was to the north, maybe like 2 houses in this picture. I think it's the blue house with the deck. They did get a variance to reconstruct a portion of their house and the deck a couple of years ago as well, kind of under this non-conforming. So I believe most of them are they're just built out prior to the regulations. But I don't know specifically where they're situated, like how close they are, or how far away they are.
Okay. How long is that breakwater? Is it the full 60-foot length of the property?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Chuck may be able to give you more answers to that.
All right. I'll come back. Okay.
Further questions for Bailey? Thanks, Richard. Further questions?
Oh, I do. You mentioned it, but on page 268, item 3 in the narrative, the existing foundation and buildings are cracking and decomposing, and I suspect that's due to the proximity
yes.
of the structure to the water. So either originally it was bad building to begin with, or it's so close to the lake that it causes a problem with weather and water and ice. And how do we know which it is?
I mean, I could give you my opinion, but Chuck can probably answer that question more as to what his professional opinion of what's causing that. So.
All right, thanks.
I had one more question, Bailey. So the variance request is also obviously for the vertical expansion of the structure within the lakeshore protection zone. In your opinion, I mean, isn't a reasonable alternative that they just rebuild the home as is?
So
And don't expand vertically and make a more traditional roof line?
and that's an option that they have. I know Chuck can explain this more, but more of the issue of it's not a simple go in and remodel like what we generally see with these types of projects. There's really not much that, from what I understand, is savable to do that. So it takes a full reconstruction. I think at that point, that's where they would like to make
But
it
they
more
could
livable.
reconstruct to the same configuration
They could,
as the
yep,
current
and that's
roof line without expanding vertically?
Yep, that is an option to do. At this point, they're requesting the full amount, but you could ask him what other options there are.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thanks very
Okay.
much. Chuck, if you have anything to add, please just name and address for the record again, please.
Chuck Bergen-Smith, box 5322, Whitefish. And to answer one of Richard's questions on the deck, I believe it was last year, or I think it was last year, they went before, I don't know if it was a council or if it was a Lakeshore Protection Committee to redo that deck. It was in ill repair, and they got that passed. And so that deck has all new structure under it already. So I don't know what that process was. I didn't know these people at the time. So that's...
So the structure under the deck in the photo was rebuilt, but not the exterior?
No, the exterior was
Facade, the
left alone.
breakwater?
The riprap and all that was the same. They just put new wood underneath the deck and new Trex decking.
Okay.
And to answer your question about the foundation, two things. When they built the old A-frame years ago, they used pier blocks, and then somebody came in and they poured a consistent footing. And that footing has cracked in a few spots, but it isn't sinking in the lake by any means. It's just poor workmanship, basically. Our plan is with the engineer. I mean, in a project like this, we have to get an engineer involved. We had planned on pinning all the broken concrete sides with rebar, and then we're going to fill that hole. The crawl space was only not even 2 feet to the ground. There was no access to it. All the boards are rotten, and the floor in there was doing one of these numbers. So what we plan on doing is pouring a big monolithic slab in there, basically fill that whole crawl space in and have that thing sitting on one block of concrete where it can't go anywhere. We tie all the old foundation parts with rebar into the new, and everything is kind of encapsulated at that point, so nothing can get out, go to the lake, or have any issues as far as 100 years down the road. It'll still be standing. So that's the plan. And I have pictures of it when we started in about a month and a half ago, doing some demo work for the engineer, and he wanted to know what the actual structure looked like underneath the floor, what the footings were, and so on. So by the time we got into it, it was looking pretty bad. The rot in the walls, critters that were living there. They had the old A-frame, and they built another house around that A-frame, and they added on another addition to it. It's been remodeled 3 times, and the wiring in the walls, I mean, it was a mess. And like I say, the animal carcasses and stuff in there was pretty bad. So the owner, had respiratory problems from living there this summer, and we found out why. So that was, and there again, poor workmanship was 90% of it. We did look at alternates as far as construction ideas. My plan was just go put a new floor in, remodel it. Well, when we got into it, for my liability reasons, I can't do it. I mean, we just can't patch something up, because then it's on me as soon as I touch it. So if we either do it right, or I don't know what they can do. They can rebuild the structure the way it was, but I don't know how I'm going to get the foundation correct. And then we just end up in the same boat down the road with somebody coming in going, hey, somebody built this thing and it's falling apart.
But you could certainly get the foundation correct and not expand vertically.
No, well, the old A-frame is there. We could build something similar to the A-frame. All we're doing is changing. We couldn't leave the A-frame because it was rotted out too. Sure. The way they did the roof system, we just changed it to vertical walls. So the actual upstairs isn't any bigger than the downstairs. It just doesn't come up into a big vault. It comes up vertically. So it's more usable space, but it's the same square footage that was there from the beginning.
And that roof peak is the same elevation as what's being proposed? Is
Yeah,
it higher or lower?
It kind of has to be, because I don't know if you have in your packet, that upper 3-story section, there was a deck that came out from that. Yeah. And the old A-frame came to that part of the deck.
Okay.
And it can't go past that because there was a door there and a deck around there. So it's virtually going to go back within inches of the same height that was there. And if you've ever been by there, I'm sure the neighbors wouldn't mind changing that. It's like having an old trailer next door. So, but either way, we're just trying to make it right.
Thanks, Chuck. Richard?
I don't want to second guess the owner, but it sounds to me that it might be more prudent to scrape it and start over and then get into some compliance with the lakeshore protection requirements.
We had talked about that. The issue is like at the last meeting, somebody had brought up, well, what if this technically was just a bare lot? And then they came in, somebody wanted to build a house on it. Well, we go back to the regulations between all the setbacks and the street and everything. There's the 16-foot building envelope. So what do you do? And there again, like I mentioned in the other meeting, was you have an $800,000 piece of ground that they're being taxed on, just the land, and they're not going to build a 16-foot house there. So they're trying to get it back into reasonable use as far as they're concerned. It virtually is going away. The 3-story part of it, I have to treat it for mold. The 2 floors of the walls have partially rotted out, and it was from the vault down 2 floors. It ran down the walls. So they're basically getting a new house, is the way it works. But we're just, if we weren't that close to the lake, it wouldn't be an issue by any means. But it's the oddest one I've ever seen. I've done a lot of 100-year-old homes in town here. It's the oddest thing I've ever seen.
It would be 16 feet wide if it met all of the requirements.
Correct.
However, we do have, correct me if I'm wrong, David, people can come in and ask for an exception. Is that correct?
That's only through the water quality regulations. Okay. So they would have to get a variance to go into the setbacks.
Okay.
which is from the Board of Adjustment and possibly from the Lakeshore Committee as well, if it goes into the Lakeshore Zone.
Again, I'm not trying to design this house, but when I look at the picture of the breakwater, for example, that's in disrepair, I'm wondering if it's not possible to, instead of having the deck at that level, move the deck up then to the second floor like it does the next neighbor to the north, or the two neighbors to the north who put that deck in. If there's some alternative here to deal with those issues. Maybe I'm just blowing smoke.
I guess what's the concern with, I mean, if you think about the house, the footprint, it doesn't change, but the actual looks, the elevation looks different when we're done.
Mm-hmm.
It's still sitting in the same spot.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we're going to get around your concern with that, short of shrinking the house, and then we just went from the original footprint that
Right.
it's been there for, they've owned it for 12 plus years. I guess I don't know how to work around your concern with building something different.
At this point, I'm just looking at that breakwater and trying to figure out another non-conforming structure in the lake, and this may be an opportunity to get rid of it.
You could buy the lot. No, I mean, and Craig Wickham from Whitefish Land Surveying, he did all the legwork in the pins and all the setbacks and everything, and identified all the property boundaries. And the breakwater comes up on the north side next to Dunlop's place, and then it kind of curves in, and then their property sits back where their riprap and rock is. It kind of goes back in toward Birch Point. So it's not, the whole place isn't sitting right there. And what I measured was almost 10 feet from the mark to the front of the house where the deck sits. So there is a little bit of a buffer there. It's a unique, I've never seen a house on Whitefish Lake with a deck over the lake. I mean, it's, but it's been there for, there was a concern back a year or so ago when they redid the deck. I'm sure that would have been brought up there, or they would have just said no. So I don't know where that was at. So.
Further questions for Chuck?
I can show you pictures.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate your time.
You bet. Thank you.
I would prefer just to keep the meeting moving along, a motion to either effect, and we'll deliberate from there.
My record on these things is not very good, but I'll move to deny.
There's a motion on the table for denial. Is there a second to that motion?
Get some discussion going.
For discussion purposes, seconded by Councillor Fury. Richard, please.
Yeah, with all due respect, Chuck, that I'm not sure all of the alternatives to at least partially comply with our lakeshore protection have been met. And I think that this is a grand desire, but I think there has to be some alternative that would move us a little closer to some lakeshore protection.
Andy.
Yeah, I guess a number of things. You know, first I look at the drawings and I see a nice shiny new deck with new handrail, and then I look at what's up there and they say that they're going to leave the deck and the handrail and the beat-up wall that's basically built in the lake at this point, and I guarantee you, they're back here next year looking to build a new deck and a new wall and everything else, and then everybody's gonna go, Lakeshore Protection Committee included. It's like, well, gee, we let them build the house, and it looks really nice, and that deck looks really crappy, and we're gonna go ahead and let them do it. And, you know, I see that the 16 feet of buildable envelope is challenging, but I also see, as Richard says, there are probably some other alternatives in that. You could look at a variance from the water quality setback, and you could probably look for another variance with a little bit of intrusion into the 20 feet, given the depth of the lot, and get a structure on there that would clean up a lot of that mess. And I mean, I'm sorry, I know I live on the lake, and I know this house, and it looks like junk, and fixing the house behind it is not going to clean up what it looks like from the water, because we're still going to see that beat up wall, and we're still going to see that beat up deck. And like I said, that ain't going to last long. We're going to see them back in here with this drawing and go, hey, look, you approved this, and look, we should really have this nice new deck and new handrail. And you know what? They're going to build that in the water, because that's where that thing is built. It's built in the lake. And I understand it's like, well, gee, you're paying on $800,000 worth of lot here for property taxes. Well, I'll tell you, I own a 15-foot lot on the lake, and I can't build anything on that, and I pay full tax load on that. So I understand how that works. That's not necessarily an excuse, in my opinion, to grant the variance. And if I kind of look through a number of these things on here, and the discussion and background information, if I look through the first 3 bullet points, I say, I don't know why we would allow them to do that. Possibly the 4th we would do it, existing dwelling unit situated in the Lakeshore Protection Zone may be remodeled, maintained in accordance with the following standards. But then we go on to say, in that same thing, the dwelling units are potentially harmful through intrusion of non-aquatic land use in an aquatic environment, creation of impervious surfaces, increased surfaces, storm runoff into the lake, concentrating human activities on the shoreline, obstruction of scenic views, and possible sewer leakage. Underline, no permanent or temporary dwelling units or portions thereof shall be constructed within the Lakeshore Protection Zone. This includes roof overhangs, drip lines, balconies, bay windows, chimneys, and decks, etc. I didn't say that very well. Chimneys, not chimneys, but that sounds like something from a Disney movie. So I got to say, I have a really hard time supporting this. I do understand that the house is substandard. I do understand that it needs to be redone. That part I get. But when we start talking about foundation repair, basically sounds like it has no foundation, so we're going to pour a new foundation. Suddenly we're not just building up off an existing foundation, we're basically building a new house is what we're doing. We're not just repairing what's there. I mean, if I look at the drawing and I look at what exists there today, there's not going to be much left of what's there. They're going to tear that thing down to the foundation and start from scratch. We're building a new building is what we're doing. Let's not kid ourselves. Remodeling is we go in and put a new kitchen in, and we put new siding on it, and we replace the windows. And remodeling isn't tearing the foundation out, tearing down the existing structure and putting a new one up. That's building a new building. So I'll have to support Richard's motion.
Thank you, Andy. Further comments on the motion? Excuse me?
Can I ask one question of Andy? Because
Sure.
I know with zoning variances, if you deny it, they can't reapply for another year. So I'm wondering if it's something where if you're, I don't know in this case, I looked in the regulations, I didn't see anything about reapplying, but that would be my one concern, if it would be something of having them create a new plan, or as Richard said, maybe it's better, can they pull it out or do something else? I'm just making the option of maybe necessarily denying it, but maybe tabling it or postponing it to another meeting to come up, because I would hate for them to be stuck waiting for a year to try to reapply if, we're taking that long. So that's just my question. I don't know if there's an answer.
Dave or Angie, can you respond to that question?
Sorry, we're just talking about it.
Okay, take your time. You guys need a couple minutes, we can take a quick recess, and we'll reconvene here at about 8:32. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll acknowledge Dave or Angie regarding Bailey's clarification.
Sure, and there's nothing in the lakeshore regulations that would prevent them from reapplying if it were denied within a year. So.
Okay, great. Further comments or discussion by the council? We do have a motion on the table for denial. That motion was seconded by Councilor Fury. Is there further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 5-1 vote with Councilor Williams voting in opposition. Which brings us on to item 8A. You have Dana's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions from the council? I did have one, Dana. When we met earlier, you mentioned November 4th. We will have a work session on.
Yes, so that's one of my updates. We will have a work session on the utility rules and regulations that govern our water, wastewater, and actually garbage utility. So staff has been working on updating those for quite some time, but we're going to bring them forward at the work session to go over the major changes that staff is proposing.
Great, thanks very much. Anything additional to report on?
I do. First, I met with Susan Nicosia, the city manager of Columbia Falls, just to give you an update that they are still looking at resort tax. They actually have been looking at our ordinance and she asked me, what things could we improve on, or, what challenges have we had? And since I had the experience as an auditor, auditing the resort tax, I was able to give her some of that information as well from my prior position with the Denning Downing Associates. But I think it's really great that they're looking into it. They have a committee. They're looking to come forward with a vote actually next spring, so it'll be soon. I also wanted to touch on and expand a little bit of discussions with Republic Services since we had public comment this evening. And the contract that we do have with them allows for a 3% rate increase every year. We're going to be looking into that. We've had some comments that maybe those rates have been increased higher than that. So Rose and myself will be auditing what they've done with their fees. And it is important to note that garbage, unfortunately, there's an exclusivity requirement in state law that requires that we can only be serviced by Republic Service because of their location to Whitefish. Recycling, however, we can go with any vendor, but we are stuck with Republic Services. So that being said, that will be difficult. I think we will talk a little bit about garbage and the billing aspect at the rules and regulations update at the work session. And we did reach out immediately once we found out about the issue with the small fees. We reached out to Mike with Republic Services. He promised that nobody would be sent to collections or that service would be shut off if they didn't make payment. However, they absorbed staff who used to work for North Valley Refuse, and they're continuing to work on customer service at the location here. So we apologize for anybody that has experienced poor customer service. It is a very important aspect of Mike and his team that they're working on. And they will be sending out a letter this winter to just kind of give an update. And they have assured us that that will not happen again with the rate increase. That was not caused by the city. They can update their rates annually by 3% automatically by contract, but I don't know how it would have happened in October when our contract started in April. So, and it could just be a timing that October 1st is when the rates are changed, but they've again assured us that that won't happen again. So that is all.
Thanks, Dana. Richard, follow-up?
Yeah, maybe you could ask Republic Services to send an email to all the people that they sent emails to apologizing. That would go a long way, and explaining what it is they intend to do. I think that's part of public service, is to admit a mistake and then say this is how we're fixing it. So anything you can do or the city can do to encourage them to do the right thing would be, I think, appreciated by our citizenry.
Absolutely, and I'll also ask him to watch the council meeting video as well. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Dana. We'll move on to item 9, which we do have the need to reappoint Public Works Director Craig Workman to the Solid Waste Board for a term ending December 31, 2022, and this is item 9A of the agenda. Frank.
I would move to appoint Public Works Director Craig Workman to the Solid Waste Board for a term ending December 31st, 2022.
I will second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Craig, any further comment?
I've also been referred to as the garbage czar, so if that could work its way into the motion, that's fine.
Kind of like Oscar the Grouch.
That's right. Further comment from the council? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. Michelle? Thanks, Craig. You do have enclosed in the packet a letter from Bob and Catherine Seaman regarding the Lakeshore variance requests that we approved last meeting. The project's located at 1716 West Lakeshore Drive. Any comment on that letter from the council? Not seeing any, we'll move on to councilor comments. Richard, would you like to start?
Sure. For those in the viewing and listening audience, it's still not too late to pick up the apples. We do have bears in town. And then I'm wondering if we can have a public service announcement and a reminder on winter parking restrictions out to all of the folks in Whitefish, because I noticed that you're trying to get the leaves up, and that's hard to do when people are parked on both sides of the street, and that the October 1st restrictions are in force.
Thank you, Richard. Andy?
If I can get my microphone to turn on there. Couple quick things. Michelle, thanks for dinner. It was awesome tonight, as usual. So that was great. So Maria and Angie and I got, on the 10th of October, Angie and I got to stand around in the cold, and Maria got to stand around in the sunshine in the morning at the Reservoir Trailhead. But it was something hosted by Diane Conradi, actually, I think, put it together, and it was the Montana Access Project, and it was recreation, trail managers, and kind of government people from around the state of Montana, Idaho. There's some Sandpoint City Council people there, and then from British Columbia. And so there's a spot, the groups toured around. They went to the Spencer Mountain Trailhead where we were at. They went to the Reservoir Trailhead, and then they went to State Park. Talked about all of the kind of things that we do as a city. And once again, I just want to pat everybody on the back, from staff to voters to people in our community to everyone that sat up here over the years. Pretty impressive what we do in this community compared to what other communities try and do, and it's pretty cool. So that's it.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for helping out with that as well. Ryan?
No comment.
Thank you, Ryan. Katie?
No comment.
Frank?
Nothing further this evening. Thank you.
All right. Melissa? Thank you. I wanted to quickly expand on I think it was Mary Flowers who asked what our plan is to permanently fill the city manager position. I did have a chance to meet with Angie and Dana in advance of this meeting, and obviously Dana stepped up to the plate by assuming both an interim role as our city manager via your appointment, as well as her ongoing responsibilities as chief financial officer for the city of Whitefish, both of which she's doing an exemplary job at. It's a huge lift, and thank you again, Dana, for rising to the occasion. I would like to get us to a point where we can permanently fill both of these positions sooner than later, given the workload and demand that it is placing on Dana. We had initially discussed a 3-month interim position extending through the end of November. I would like to move that timeline up and begin internal advertising for the position, which we are required to do for up to 5 days, no less than that, in terms of an internal advertisement. If we could perhaps run this by staff, I guess I'm making a suggestion at this point, maybe get together with Sherry, but if we could have that internal advertisement begin on November 4th with a closing date of November 8th, that would meet our 5-day requirement internally. I believe November 11th is a holiday, so I suggest that perhaps on November 12th, and I'm willing to volunteer my time to screen the internal applicant pool along with Sherry, and I think it would be great, Angie, for you to be there as well. And if another counselor would like to help in that process, certainly indicate so. Assuming we do have internal candidates apply, my suggestion would be that we schedule interviews for that following or that same Friday, which would be November 15th. And I would ask that the entire council, if you're available, to be available to help in that interview process, because again, this is one of two positions that directly report to the city council. The second, of course, being our city manager. So again, I would suggest that, assuming we get an internal candidate pool, that we hold those interviews on Friday, November 15th. Are folks generally available that day? And again, these are kind of some fluid. November 15th, it's a Friday. 15th.
Earlier in the day is preferable on a Friday?
Angie? Yes.
Maybe we move that to that Monday, just to give us a little bit more time.
The 18th?
Yes.
Okay. Are folks available on the 18th, which I believe is a council day?
Yes.
Okay. That would be great. And again, this is just a suggestion. Welcome to feedback if you guys think we should head in a different direction. With that said, hopefully we'll get a qualified pool of internal candidates that we can interview on the 18th of November and go from there. Just my suggestion. And I think I'm seeing head nods across the dais, so if that's okay with staff, we'll move forward with that general calendar.
Yeah, we'll touch base with Sherry.
Okay.
Make sure that she can do all that.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks for the feedback. Anything further from staff? Craig.
I'd like to make a public service announcement that it is past October 1st, and so we do have alternate side parking in effect. That means on the odd days, you park on the odd side of the street. Even days, you park on the even side of the street. Even sides in Whitefish are typically the north and west. The odd sides are typically the south and east. And that only applies to roads that don't have existing parking restrictions. For example, the downtown 2-hour parking is still in effect. Alternate side doesn't apply. If there's no parking on one side or the other year-round, alternate side parking doesn't apply on those roads either. So any questions? Public Works is happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Craig. Any questions for Craig? Not seeing anything additional from the council tonight. We are adjourned. Thanks.
Only 50,000